Hey, everyone out there in generative AI land. I'm Bret Kinsella, host of Gain, the generative AI news rundown, also involved in the old Synthedia and VoiceBot.ai world. I've been doing that for a lot of years, over a decade. Actually, I think we're going on 11 years, like exclusively in AI these days. And someone else who is really deep into AI these days. It's my friend Eric Schwartz. How you doing, Eric?
Doing well, doing well. Glad to be back and excited to get to it.
Awesome. Eric is the head writer at VoiceBot.ai. And I don't know, what are you up to? Like 800 articles or something like this in generative AI that you've written about?
Yeah, it starts. Yeah, sometimes it's hard to remember a time I wasn't writing about this stuff all the time.
Well, we've seen this in the other AI spaces, conversational AI, like other segments, and like generative AI as well. At some point, you forget the things you write, and people like will say, "Hey, you wrote about this, like in this," and like I don't remember which month this was. So we,
100%.
we do the best. We do our best though to sort of keep all this information together. It's coming really hard and fast. Um, we have a really packed show for you again today. Sorry we missed everybody last week, but travel, logistics, all those other types of things. I've been gone for 2 weeks. I think I was like in the comments in my dentist chair 2 weeks ago when Eric and Andrew led the discussion. But I'm really excited about the topics we have today. We're going to talk a lot about assistance and the evolution of assistance. We've got new funding rounds. We've got like new giant market cap. Plus, we have like intellectual property ownership. There's lots of things that have been going on. So we basically have 2 weeks worth of news for you today. So we better get at it. All right. So what do we have first, Eric? I think we're talking about GPTs with memory.
Yes, we are. OpenAI has been keeps cranking out new ChatGPT features. The latest is what might be called a customizable memory. The idea is that it can ChatGPT will be able to remember context and details from previous conversations. It can help make the chatbot more personalized, although with plenty of caveats and a lot of options for things you can delete and sort of essentially erase its memory. It's the way of making it more of a customizable tool, not only through the regular ChatGPT, but also through the custom GPTs in
Right.
the GPT store that OpenAI is very keen on. They're trying to really make it so that however much you want to shape the AI, you can. That includes, of course, a new temporary chat method, which is sort of like an incognito mode, although not quite, because it will still rely on whatever you put in your sort of the little bio that you can write for ChatGPT to explain how you want it to respond to you in general, but it won't actually hang on to those conversations when referring back later.
Okay. So there's some history here too, and I think a lot of the people who follow Gain and like know about the voice assistance history. But there's this idea that we have these general purpose solutions that are just really good. They can either execute tasks for you, like even Siri, like was really good. It could open up applications, it could create memos for you, and those types of things. Alexa, the same type of thing. What happens over time is they say, okay, well, this is great. You treat me like every other user on the system, maybe a little bit of configuration because you know what I'm logged into or something like that. But for the most part, it's not very personalized. Every session is new. And so this idea of session context, like can I just like maintain what's going on in my interaction with you right now as an assistant, is like a really important concept, and it wasn't available immediately. So these multi-turn conversations, these things that like ChatGPT does so well, those didn't even exist initially, and it took a long time for the voice assistant and some of the chat solutions to add that in. There's this other idea of user context. And that's where most of these systems have really never excelled. We have some things like in terms of like connection to Spotify or something like that, that level of binary on or off type of connection, but not really more than that. However, there have been some movements along those lines. So if people will remember with Siri shortcuts, for example, the iPhone would observe how you use different applications and might suggest a shortcut so that you could just ask the assistant to then just give them one command and it would do maybe like it would just execute something for you, or even multi-step execution. Something similar came out with Alexa with Hunches, where over time it would identify your routines and might suggest like, oh geez, Siri's trying to talk to me right now. So like you always have to be careful about these things. But so then Alexa would do these hunches and would say, hey, you might want this routine to set up for your smart home or something like that. So those were learning mechanisms where it was user context. And then Amazon through Alexa actually in 2020 rolled out this teachable AI, which was you could tell Alexa some of your preferences, those types of things. And they would do that. And then if like, just to give you more history, like Bixby, Samsung Bixby, like a lot of people like don't even remember that it was around anymore. But that would actually remember if like you always chose, or if you most often chose Uber as your ride share and you wanted to get a ride, but they had a Lyft capsule as well. Over time, it would just basically assume you want that or allow you to choose that would be your preference. Okay, so that's like context. So like this has come for a long time. Now, when we have ChatGPT, it's so much more powerful on this like knowing assistant thing, like understanding your context. Are you a business owner? Are you interested in paragliding? Like all these other types of things, like how you use it, what you've used it in the past, so that you don't have to, every time you do a prompt, start over and say, this is what I want, that is what I want. And we did have some customization, although that's since been removed. This customization, you could say like, I'm a researcher and this is what I want you to do for me. And a lot of that has moved into this idea of essentially what you would call a system prompt, which is appended to whatever you want at any given time and just gives that context so the large language model knows what you're most likely to want. A lot of that has moved into GPTs. So basically, if you use a private GPT, you can set it up for your different personas. Here's my work persona. Here's my paragliding persona, whatever. And so that's the way that they were thinking about it. What we're talking about now with memory goes beyond that. And that is this idea that it's going to learn things about you over time. It can make assumptions. Those will be added context. We think of it as a system prompt, which will give additional guidance to the LLM every time you enter something in. And as you have on the screen here right now, and you could take that down. I think we're probably seeing that enough. But it will actually show you the inventory of what it knows about you and gives you some of that control, which was very important. Like Google, Amazon, Apple, they all learned this with the voice assistant space. You need to give users control where you can go and say, these are the things that the system thinks it knows about me. And if it's something you don't want them to know, or it's an anomaly or something, you can just delete it and won't use that as context anymore. But it should give you this more tailored experience. And I'll just add one more thing to it. Like why? Why is this important? So first of all, it's a better experience. It's very user-friendly because like it's going to tailor to your needs. It's not going my assistant is going to operate differently than Eric's assistant, which is going to be good for us. But there's one other thing that's really important here from a OpenAI standpoint. OpenAI wants more user loyalty and it wants people to use it with higher frequency. And so personalization is a way, essentially a soft power way of locking people into your system, because once it knows more about you, kind of like Spotify knows more about what you like with music, it's hard to move away sometimes. You got all your playlists set up and things like that. This is the type of thing where ChatGPT has a lot of people who've used it. There's not a lot of daily users, a lot of weekly and monthly users. This would be the type of thing that would tie it much more closely to that personalization. And they're doing it kind of just in time because Google with the new Gemini, which we're going to talk about in a minute, is going to like go deep on that angle.
Yeah, well, I mean that's always been Google's thing. I mean, how many websites do you sign into using Google because it's just so easy that you don't want to shift or change anything? And how many, as Alan says, we're used to this sort of like thing. We're used to this sort of thing from Google in a way that it's easy to be suspicious and immediately spot some potential downside because Google has made mistakes and sometimes doesn't seem to know quite what its users want from it. But yeah, I think ChatGPT is still in the realm of it's not the average person using it. It's still very much people who are interested in trying out new technology.
Yeah. And it has kind of permission. And Alan Furstenberg has a comment here, and I had this conversation. Alan Furstenberger and I were at the same event in 2019, Google I/O. I talked to an executive from Google about this, and this was about this idea of in-home voice assistants, smart speakers, and like he confirmed that Google really felt that if they were the first one to put a listening device in a home, it would have been terrible. It's kind of like a lot of the things that Snapchat did with smart glasses and be able to take a picture of people. Like everyone's like, that's great. I'm so happy that Snapchat's doing this. Whereas 2 years earlier, there was like a total uproar about Google Glass having the exact same capability. And so a lot of it's really just context. And I think there's a really important strategic aspect here with Google, is that because they're viewed differently, some positively, some negatively, but they just have baggage that like new companies don't necessarily have. That like Amazon, like people are like, okay, fine, Alexa can listen to me. Like it's a shopping app. Like what do I care, right? Versus Google, where they already had some preconceived notions. And I think that's changed a little bit for Amazon, but Google, they had some preconceived notions about surveillance, which like may or may not be justified. But really, really an important point that like Google in this case is should be happy that OpenAI just rolled this out, because OpenAI is going to like set the stage, and Google can say, "Oh, we're just doing what OpenAI is doing, and you can turn it off, and you can manage it, and all these other things."
Yeah, the irony, of course, being that people got nervous about Google because they were so good, and yet when it comes to generative AI, at least early on, they were stumbling out of the gate a little bit in a way that made them seem less of a omnipresent, all-knowing, anonymous, AI corporation.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, if anyone just joined, this is Generative AI News Rundown. We do this usually every week. We've been off 2 weeks since the last one, but we just go through the news of the day. Eric and I write about these things. We do a lot of analysis. We have a lot of context, so we try to talk about that. But one of the best things about this is people who are here like add comments and add to the discussion, which I like. So do that if you've got something to say about this topic. Please do it. And also, if you are there, like on LinkedIn or on actually we're on X as well, or on YouTube, let us know you're out there. Just say hey, just say a quick hello and where you're coming in from, because that's always good context for us as well. There is another comment here from Paul Sweeney. Perhaps this is a requirement for platforms such as OpenAI providing actions. If it is going to do something for me, it has to know my preferences. Also, multi-hop actions would benefit from it. And I think it's perfectly true. Now, I will say that if it's going to do something for me, I could just explicitly say what I want it to do every time in my prompt. And so this is just like, it's a user convenience feature. But beyond that, there's some things that I wouldn't always think to put in the prompt that might be like added context. There's also privacy concerns, which I think are very legitimate along these ideas. But yes, really for this to function smoothly and for people to really want to embrace it, I think that a certain level of customization makes a big benefit. And I also believe that that's been one of the reasons why Alexa, Siri, Google Assistant didn't get more usage beyond sort of these like easy transactional request
level
type of things.
Yeah, I think so too. I think
and Alan has another comment. So there's a question. Will the EU data portability law apply to OpenAI? Will you be able to move your profile from OpenAI to Google and vice versa? I have no idea. Like, I would think yes. I don't know. But I also know that like OpenAI has been pretty good at lobbying, so we'll see.
Yeah, and who knows? I mean, it may end up being, there's so many new like file formats designed for transferring over like your email profiles or any other personalized information that this could apply to that. But I don't think there's going to be a quick answer to that question, and when it comes to the law.
All right, so that's been cool, and hopefully the context was useful for some folks. At least like spurred some of this discussion, which is awesome. Google Bard. I believe I was trying to remember if it was during a Gain or something else. You and I were having this conversation in December. We're like, why don't they just rename it Gemini? Bard is such a terrible name. It's a fine launch name. It's like an internal name, stuff like that. But Gemini is kind of cool, and it sort of meets the standard of up and down the stack. It's similar to the way OpenAI does it, with everything's just a GPT. But I think more importantly than the renaming and the rebranding, although that's like sort of good surface level stuff, we have a much more capable than Bard solution now when you talk about Gemini Advanced.
Yeah, it's Google sort of, as we were saying, they seem to have stumbled early on with their with the Bard rollout, but now they're very much in the groove, and Gemini Advanced is absolutely fits that. It's not only it not only offers the most powerful version of the Gemini LLMs, it also is incorporated into an existing Google product, so that if you're already subscribing to Google One, then now you get access to it. And if you want to get access to it, you get 2 months free trial, and then maybe you'll just keep using it. And now suddenly you're deeply enmeshed into much more of the Google ecosystem. And related to that, of course, is just that it's not just with Bard, but as the headline says, it's taking over all the names for products like Duet, which was the workspace one, and even outright replacing the Google Assistant mobile app with Gemini's, and turning everything into Gemini. And whether or not you're using the sort of the free version, which is the less powerful one, or Gemini Advanced, which is the much more powerful one, it's still all Google. And if people start feeling like they want more from Gemini, then suddenly there's a easy, convenient monthly subscription that gets you not only Gemini Advanced, but also all those other features. So it's all very much the Google playbook, which can't deny has been working for them for a long time now.
The other thing too is, let's face it, Google is the best fast follower. I have this argument with people all the time. They always tell me, "Oh no, Apple is." Forget, like, it's just not true. Like, empirically, you can just look at it. Google is an amazing fast follower, and it's really helpful to them sometimes when someone sets up a market in such a way that they can just come in and then they can use all the other things. And so I haven't used it as much for the personalization features so far, but I will say that I was always very disappointed with Bard in terms of its hallucination index. Just seemed way off the charts. Some of the things were obviously very good, and but the integration with like slides and sheets was like really good. I like that aspect of it. But one of the things I was looking at is a review online where someone had used it for local questions, restaurants, getting places, things like that. The integration with Google services makes it much more like a personal assistant in that way, because OpenAI very typically, even if it knows the right answer, won't know the right address to like the place, or they'll have something that'll concatenate things. So yeah, Alan said, "Hey, but man, the rollout of Gemini has been a mess. Google One is a huge fiasco." That this is also true, that Google does somehow, there's always some power struggle where they've got something amazing and new, and they want to tie it to something that's like this millstone that they've just like, oh, we just like, this is our last chance to make this thing amazing. Or they think it's amazing despite the fact that the market hasn't really adopted it.
Yeah,
and so
it's the cautious and then all
fiasco.
Yeah,
and so far, like,
it's a reminder that Google basically had almost all the technical developments already in place. Like, they already knew what they wanted to do, but they thought they're going to do a 10-year rollout, not a 1-year rollout. So it changed things quite a lot in that way.
Fair enough. What I will say is, I think that Google just, I think they shoot themselves in the foot a lot when they shouldn't. But I think we're on a path now. Excuse me one second. I think we're on a path now that that we might have our most legitimate competitor to ChatGPT, which is going to be really good for the market. I think choice is important. Plus, integrating it into search, integrating these other services, I think will be great. And it could be that actually Gemini has this advantage of this everyday use, because people already use all the Google services every day. If they just start using it through Gemini, you could see a scenario where actually your daily active users for Gemini leapfrog OpenAI's ChatGPT.
Yeah, and Google did actually, talking before about the issue of, if Google did it, it would be a huge issue. I mean, I read about this. There actually was a warning issued by Google saying that, oh, by the way, we do save your conversations, and we are going to use them for training and so on, unless you say otherwise. And Brett, we've been covering this kind of stuff for a long time, but going back 4 years now, where there was a huge uproar over who is listening to Google Assistant and Alexa conversations, and now it's like, oh well, who's going to be looking at your Gemini conversations, and who's going to be analyzing what the model responds to you with, and it could be make people nervous again, which is of course something Google already struggles with.
Yeah, and Alan talked about the Gemini 5 Pro announcements, which I haven't had a chance to dig into. I just
Yeah,
know
it
they're
just came
surface
out
level
today.
at this point.
Yeah.
But much larger context window, so much more of a like-to-like comparison to ChatGPT right now, and in some ways with the Pro model like above it, potentially. So I think that's actually a really good idea. Also, them saying they're using a mixture of experts architecture, which makes a ton of sense, and like that's a longer conversation about how the models work, but is essentially has long been rumored that's what GPT-4 is, that's what Mixtral 8.7b is. So yeah, I think I'm optimistic in a way for Google. I'm optimistic for Google in a way I've not been at all since pre-November 2022, because I think there's just been like a lot of missteps, but they were smart to sort of just say, you know what, I'm not going to invest too heavily in Palm. I'm not going to push it out there too hard. I know I'm behind. Let's make sure when I come to market, I have something that people really like. And I've heard there's a lot of organizations are now ready to try Gemini that would never have given Palm a second look.
Yeah, and it's also that they don't have to do any, like, it is, they're replacing Duet and the mobile app. There's that sense of like, you don't have to try anything new. It's just you use these products, and now there's this other element to it. Like it's a smoother path that Google has already built in. And again, plus, we're still at the relatively early. People who want to try this stuff will look for it, but it's not the average person using Gmail yet, but that will at some point happen, and those people are still going to be Google users.
Yeah, not to be left out. Hugging Chat. Anybody remember that? If you haven't tried Hugging Chat, I recommend everyone go over to Hugging Face and try it out. It's not as good as ChatGPT. It's not as good as like where Gemini is right now, but it is pretty good. But look, what I really like is this is your open source alternative, and you now have GPTs, so you can create sort of these cool experiences which you can share with others. But a lot of the other thing people don't realize is like the GPTs in general are just are also a good way to customize your experience, so you don't have to like do some sort of prompt magic every time you like open up. You can just like open up your version of your researcher or your news or your fun or your game or something like that. And sometimes it's a cool way to do it. Not everybody wants to go to that trouble. It's a little cognitive load, but it is a way to basically make each one of these things into an app. Any thoughts on what Hugging Face is doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's, as you said, it's not as powerful. It's not as immediately useful as some of the other ones, but that's not the point. I mean, Hugging Face is very committed to the open source model, very committed to the sort of ground up approach. I think that there is definitely a market for that, and also it really makes it easier for independent developers who maybe don't want to get enmeshed in one specific tech ecosystem like Google or Microsoft to try out all these things. And it really, I mean, the looser rules mean also that you're going to get some ideas that may or may not work out, but would be unable to even get off the ground if you're building in the GPT store or elsewhere. And it's Hugging Face, for all of the fact that they're not the mainstream of, they're not a tech giant the way Microsoft or Google is. They're still going to have a lot of interesting ideas and a lot of innovations happening there that will probably trickle up to the bigger companies, as we often see. There's a good idea one place, it's going to go show up elsewhere.
And it creates an open source wrapper that other people could potentially embed into like essentially a white label solution, sort of like put their or put a wrapper around the open source code and like bring this in and create an additional type of competition for OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, sort of the folks who have sort of stepped up and are leading this. So, all right.
Yeah,
so what
and
do we
if you're
got
worried
next?
about,
What?
Oh, sorry, I was going to say it's also, if you're worried about privacy issues, like with open source, at least you can sort of see how whatever you input is being used, even if you're not necessarily a fan of it.
Yeah, great point.
But of course, some people don't mind and would rather just wear their generative AI right on their faces, as you wrote about with these new smart glasses.
Okay, so the frames are really interesting. I mean, we joked about the monocle that Brilliant Labs came out with. I think it was last year, or maybe it must have been last year. Okay, so smart glasses are like a disaster as a product, and I think even like VR goggles in their own way are a disaster if people think about them as like a mass market device right now. We even see like with the Vision Pro, people are returning them because like they're uncomfortable and they're heavy and like all these things that are sort of obvious from the outside. But I think the more obvious thing around this isn't that VR is going to be a thing or not, because I think it will be. It's just not as broad of an application is AR. So augmented reality and glasses, smart glasses are a way to take you off the external screen and sort of put it in a more convenient area. Alan's laughing. He said smart glasses are a disaster. Sigh. Alan, the most prominent user of Google Glass ever. But I think this is what we see in the smart glasses space is that a lot of people have given up on actually display, and they start calling a smart glass something that just has audio and voice input.
Yeah.
And so we come with Brilliant Labs and their new smart glasses, and they're full on in the fact that the display is really important here. And I think that's a good idea. Like North had been doing it, you tested those in the past. But that's very important, I think, to reset this space to say it's not just about some sort of ear and voice assistant, but it's something where you actually have visual as well, because that multimodal adds a lot of value in the world so that we're not looking at our phone every time we need a visual. And I think this is very important. We talked a lot about assistants. Like this is a key vehicle for people to be able to use assistants in a convenient, hands-free, eyes-free way, and like use it in more parts of their life.
Yeah, and there's so many untapped. Like you mentioned, North. I really liked North. I thought it was a great idea. I was very bummed that they were acquired right before their next big product came out. The idea alone of having just little directions in the corner of your eyes. You don't have to constantly be checking your phone. You don't have to constantly be checking your phone when you're walking. It's also the fact that with with a subtle visual cue and generative AI, suddenly you can get explanations. I mean, people used to joke about like, oh, it's gonna like smart glasses will tell you who you're talking to if you don't remember who they are. And honestly, that's not a terrible thing if you're at a party and you can't remember someone's name. I mean, not to mention all of the accessibility ways they could be useful if you have both. If you're hearing impaired and you have all these extra visuals, or you're seeing impaired and you have all these extra audio cues involving thanks to camera and generative
plus
AI.
just the everyday stuff. Like, okay, so like Google Maps has been amazing for me able to navigate city streets, right? You don't have to know where everything is. Like you can get to something, you can walk to something very easily. And then like, I know when you're using the North glasses, you thought that was one of the things that worked really well. It's like, turn here, turn there. And, but right now it's like, it's not good. Like I saw a kid almost get killed in San Francisco a couple years ago because he's doing that. He's looking at his phone, trying to figure out where he's going while he's crossing a street, and he didn't realize he was walking against a green. And so thankfully the Uber driver was very deft and avoided him. But there's safety issues. There's all these other things. But I think what we've seen with technology over the years is it's the trend line is to bring digital services closer to our daily life in the world. We used to have to go to like a terminal in a building, and then we could go to like a terminal in our house, and then we had laptops, or we had some mobility different places, and maybe we could go to Starbucks, and then we had phones, right? All these things were bringing us closer into the world, and I think augmented reality glasses are the next thing. And that's one of the reasons why I think like the thesis around VR is harder, because it reverses that. It's almost like going back to that, going to a building in a room in order to access your digital services. Not to say that there's not value there, because there are a lot of use cases which are good, even beyond gaming. But the AR stuff, we're seeing it in work. In fact, like industrial applications are really the biggest adoption of that, aside from some of the social stuff. But I'm really excited about this. I think it's cool.
Yeah. 100%.
But we should probably move on to the next thing. We've really hit that as long as we can.
Yes. This is we're into the funding fountain world, and there's a lot of interest in synthetic media, and that includes both visuals, audio, and video, which combines all of them. And as you say, enterprise is the business world is very keen on the power of generative AI. And this company, Colossyan, they just raised $22 million. And there, it's a very straightforward proposition. You put in a script, you select an avatar, you put in some extra visuals, and you have your corporate videos, your training, your marketing, whatever it might be, and so much faster and cheaper than traditional video making. I mean, Colossyan's not alone in this. We've seen several other startups start push in this direction. But when it comes to what is good as generative AI, saving money and time on a business necessity like an onboarding video is a pretty good value proposition.
Yeah, I'm really happy for Dominic on this. Like I remember talking to him a couple years ago, sort of coming in after Synthesia. It sort of like set up the market, and it had gotten a lot of momentum. A lot of other people were in the space, and from the beginning, he was very focused on what he was going to do, and he thought there was a certain market that they could serve really well. And so, really happy to see that they've made that progress.
Yeah, 100%. But yeah, not the only funding. There's also a more global way of thinking, and this is Jua AI, which is applying generative AI models toward the natural world, starting with climate and weather, with that fun little synthetic image right there, of course. But yeah, I mean, we are using these incredibly powerful models for creating and analyzing all kinds of human behavior and in economic models, but applying it to the natural world makes perfect sense. And so, if you can use these large language models or related AI models for trying to understand how the climate is changing, or understanding not just weather patterns, but tectonic movements and things like that. I mean, it would be great to have an AI assistant for knowing what to expect from the world around us, as well as from the people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then one more nice funding thing. And speaking of people, in this case, healthcare, Ambience Healthcare just raised $70 million. They're one of, I've written about a ton at this point, the clinical AI idea, which is that you have an AI assistant, and now usually generative AI assistant, to help out doctors and other medical professionals to take their notes, to put information into records, things like that. Although Ambience actually, Ambience actually has an extra little thing, which I think is very clever, where it will actually use the generative AI to produce essentially a little pamphlet of what happened at your doctor visit, what you're going through, what you might be expecting. That's not only for the patient, but for the patient's loved ones, so that they can understand what's happening. And these sort of like personalized reports on health feels like a really good use of this technology.
Yeah, excellent. And this is a use case that people have been working on for a while. I mean, particularly in healthcare, it's very hard because it's very conversational. But over time, I think a lot of people have experienced this. Particularly, this is in the U.S. This has been the mode where the medical record systems have been data hungry, and what they've tried to do is like move a lot of that capture into the actual meeting between the patient and the medical care provider. As opposed to, it used to, like, you'd talk afterwards and they would take notes and they would enter it in. But a lot of that was happening. Like, I've sat in things with my daughter where like the doctor just stares at the screen and types for for like 10 minutes, and then turns around and has a short conversation, then goes back and types. And it breaks the conversation in a way. And actually, in a lot of ways, they capture more information, but they get less, because you don't have that dynamic where you're looking at the patient. They have something to say, you sort of hold back a little bit to let them say, or what to follow up on. You just hear the words. And this is like, we know a lot about social dynamics between people. It's not as good of a scenario. And the Dragon system out of Nuance, I think, was the first to work on this. I know Orbita did some studies with Mayo Clinic around this. But this idea is just to capture in the background, so that it gets in the EMR. It makes it a lot more efficient for the doctors and whoever the healthcare provider in the room is, so that they don't have to record everything. They can just review and make sure it's correct. But this whole idea, like Abridge did this whole idea of basically having like a post visit summary for the patient is hugely valuable. Like, if you see a doctor multiple times for some sort of condition, it's hard to remember time to time what you talked about. And I used Abridge for this for something that I was going through a couple years ago. I, I couldn't believe how valuable it was.
Yeah, my doctor's been using a different one of these same ideas, but it notably sped up the part of the appointment where they have to write down what you're saying and put everything into the records so that so they don't forget it. Although I'm imagining now if they're wearing those AR glasses and your patient says something and the glasses pop up with, oh, this might be a problem because of something that happened in a previous visit that you might not remember. But I mean, there's so much value to the idea of an assistant that is omniscient over a certain data set, I think.
Well, the good thing too is I think this technology is getting very good, and really what we have to do now is we have to move into like social acceptance. I've I've used these applications with physicians who are like, absolutely, turn it on, because they recognize that it's not about trying to record what they're doing or like I don't know what they're worried about, but it's like so that we have as a patient has clarity and that we can follow up on things and like even
Yeah.
like it even the ability for these systems to be trained on like medication names
Yeah.
and so like understand that it's like as opposed to like it's like Greek to people who are non-Greek speakers very often. There are other physicians, I can think of one in particular, who just said, no, I'm not comfortable with that, which I
True.
think is fine. I mean, I understand the privacy thing, but it's almost like, well, like you don't want anyone to know what we talked about. Like, what does that say about you and your professionalism?
Well, it's also, I mean, we've talked about this before, but the COVID-19 pandemic and everything that happened with there, one of the side effects of it was the rapid rise in telehealth and the adoption of technology in the medical field, which is often fairly conservative for good reason, usually about adopting new kinds of technology. But the demand and necessity made it possible so that it's um, whether or not it's generative AI or just an AI voice assistant or recorder and transcriber. There's a lot more. The adoption level is much higher now than it probably would have been without the pandemic happening. Honestly.
All right, folks, this is the Generative AI News Rundown. We talk about the top generative AI news of the week. We got 2 weeks of news for you here. Give us a like on LinkedIn, YouTube, X, wherever you're watching this today. We definitely appreciate it. Let us know you're out there. Make comments, questions. We'll incorporate them into the discussion. Thanks for joining us today. What do we have next, Eric?
Yes. Well, speaking of going back to the world of business and of wanting to know what's happening and keep everything in context, that's where our good friend Slack comes in, and they just came out with a bunch of new generative AI features that are really built around uh, encouraging people to not just ignore any missed threads or channels, but actually to see what's been happening. So the idea is that not only will uh, not only will Slack, save all those messages, but you can actually go back and look and see, all right, what did I miss? What happened then? And actually ask questions about conversations or get summaries of the chat. It's really if you're in a big company or you have a ton of uh, channels and threads going on, that's not a bad idea. And honestly, clearly it's having its moment right now because it's not just Slack; it's also over at Otter, which is another big name in the world of meeting transcriptions and related tools. And they have a new whole set of meeting Gen AI, as they call it, which again is a chatbot assistant to help you know what you've been missing in different meetings, or find out who's been assigned to do what, or even just get automatic summaries of meetings. And again, just efficiency, saving money, saving time. That's what people want from generative AI right now, and it's hard to blame them.
Yeah,
Uh,
I also had 3 quick things on this. One is I think thread summaries is a great idea. Everybody who's worked in Slack or any of these messaging apps understands how great that is. The second thing is Slack really announced this almost a year ago. And it was sort of like light rollout, but it gives you a sense that a lot of the flurry of announcements last year actually didn't manifest into products right away. And they are now. And so then now we'll truly see where things are heading. Um, and thanks for Paul Sweeney too. Like, yes, summarizing threads, awesome. But the I think the third thing too is I saw something recently, and this is related to Otter. Like I think it's more in Teams and Zoom that people have been doing it. But when you join a meeting late, being able to like catch up really quickly and see what the summary is or see what people have said. I've seen a lot of people saying, "Hey, that's really helped me either get into a meeting or jump into a meeting and then be like, oh, I can. There's 10 people here. I can see the summary. I can move on. I can just look at the transcript tomorrow." So there's like these new work styles that it's enabling, and I think that's going to be super fascinating.
Yeah, it's yeah, and yeah, it's very true. But and not just saving money for businesses, but as you recently wrote about, it's going to be a big help in the pharmaceutical industry as well in terms of saving money and saving lives potentially when it comes to working out how to budget for new drug research.
Yeah, I thought this was a pretty interesting study. Now, just to give people context here, this was taken of executives in the pharmaceutical industry in September of last year because they were in budgeting season for 2024. And 40% of pharmaceutical execs said that they were baking in budget savings into their 2024 expenditure budgets um, based on generative AI. So that's like, okay, so the caveat here is they don't say like how much. They're not saying like they're cutting 20%, although some departments might be. Um, they're saying that like we've already looked at generative AI, they've done their POCs, they were like looking to move to production with some things, and in 2024 they were already going to be capturing budget savings. And I think this is fairly instructive for people who are thinking about this as a new technology adoption, like, oh, aren't there problems with hallucinations and all these other types of things? There's so much benefit in certain types of applications. People are like, I can just go to market with it right now because maybe I just laid off a lot of people and I need to maintain productivity. And so my staff is stressed, but if I give them these tools, they can actually manage the workload better, or maybe they can like launch a new product or initiate some new activity that they weren't otherwise. So I think that's super interesting. I think the other thing we saw from that Bain study is like it gives you a sense of where people are focused on. IT, so code development, number one. Everybody's doing that now in some way, just about. And then you've got these things which are basically research oriented. The more words involved in a functional activity, the more likely an LLM is going to be applied in some way, either for summarization or generation or something else.
Yeah, and yeah, it's as you said, like it's not that there aren't problems or potential issues, but they're just they're so outweighed by the benefits that the resources needed to deal with the problems of generative AI are uh, way less than the resources needed to do whatever you want to do without generative
Absolutely.
AI. And yeah, it's truly amazing. And then moving on, we have a couple of notable uh, political slash policy type stories. One is honestly, truly one of the sort of a global political kind of thing, which is that um, the Pakistani ex prime minister Imran Khan, he's been in prison, and he had been helping produce generative AI versions of speeches during the election campaign using a synthetic voice clone, and then even after the actual election, which is contested and is a complex geopolitical issue. But that aside, he did declare victory from prison. But even though obviously he couldn't go out in front of his supporters, he still managed to give a victory speech using generative AI, and specifically, it seems to be 11 Labs. Voice cloning, which has been very much becoming very much part of the political story in 2024 for a lot of reasons. But it's just sort of like interesting that this is now going to be a thing for politicians who want to communicate and maybe can't do
Yeah.
so for reasons such as a prison or not being able to access their local media market. It's now suddenly synthetic media is changing the equation there.
Which is a reason why we're going to see a lot of governments as well. It's going to be an excuse or like a reason why a lot of governments are going to look at this as generative AI technologies as subversive technologies. We've already seen some of that in places. So just sort of understand like what people think about because it does change
Yeah.
things in the world in terms of what we have access to. And I think in this case, He wasn't allowed to run either, was he? But
No, it was
he was like a
yeah,
write-in candidate or something, and
yeah, exactly. He has a
because
lot of supporters who wanted him to
yeah,
be.
and like I don't know the details of it, whether like it's justified that he's jailed or not. I think it's his supporters think it is unjustified, and he said that himself. Um, but it is a way for him to to get his message out, and maybe justifiably so, in like in a situation where maybe his ideas, thoughts, and freedoms are being suppressed.
Yeah, and we're seeing it in less contentious ways, or still possibly controversial, but still less contentious in terms of using voice clones to translate a politician's speech so that they can sound like, so that they can hear their own voice speaking multiple languages that they don't speak. There's ways it can be used for slightly less complex geopolitical purposes, but it's still something that has to be considered when talking about really anything in politics and culture and so on. And but although that said, doesn't mean that you'll be seeing any patents from generative AI, according to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. So at least there will be no AI headliners.
Yeah, this is interesting. I mean, I think now the U.S. is just one market. There's other markets that are going to handle this differently, but it's obviously a large market, particularly when it comes to generative AI. And there's a couple of important things that come out of this. Now, granted, this clarification was requested explicitly in the White House executive order from November, so they only had 120 days to bring out sort of revised guidance. This is not final rules. I think there's like a whole other thing that could happen over the next 6 months, but I think this will be largely codified. And some of it isn't just rulemaking when it comes to patents, because there's legal precedent. So most of this gets sorted out in the laws, but this is the guidance to the patent examiners on like how to operate their business. And there's a few different things that came out, and I know you have a lot of context on this in other areas around copyright and things like that, which you've written about extensively. But the first thing is, if you use AI as part of the invention process of a new idea, that does not preclude you from getting it patented. The most important thing is that you as a human make a significant contribution. And this is a really interesting caveat that almost no one's really digging into. Most patents have multiple claims associated with them. And so for each claim, a natural person, a natural human, must be named as the inventor. If there is no natural human to be named as the inventor, it cannot be a claim in the patent. And each of those each natural human has to make a significant contribution. In fact, by law, in the U.S., if multiple people contribute something significant to a new invention, they have to be named in the patent. And in fact, it's like a sworn testimony when you submit the patent application, that if like you're the only one listed, that you say you're the only one who really contributed significantly. If someone else did, you're actually supposed to. Now, how that happens in practice is different, but it's supposed to be that way. One of the challenges comes that like if AI does most of the work, and so then like what happens there if it's just like a human just like asking a question, stuff like that. Now, so that's going to create some loopholes for inventions and like how we handle those and like whether those are patentable or not. But there's a couple of other things that I thought were really interesting to see in this. One is that there is a recognition that with generative AI systems that the way you prompt a machine might actually be a significant contribution. So just because the model gives you the answer, like let's say you're creating a new molecule for like a biotech product or something like that, the information you feed into the machine as part of your prompt could be the significant contribution because you basically guide the machine to giving you an output. The other thing that it does recognize is that you might, as an individual or group, might actually train a model on specific types of things, and that influences its ability to be able to come up with a good answer. And so that would also be a significant contribution. I think those are very, very effective. But the upside also of this idea that like a natural human has to be part of it is you can't have like bystander, what I call bystander inventions, where someone just said, oh, that's like an amazing thing, I'm going to patent it because I'm the first one to recognize that there's like something benefit there. But I've done nothing to actually conceive of it. And so in this case, if we look at it, uh, the buy you have to do something significant. So you can't just have like people running around and being patent trolls and doing this. They have to somehow have added to it. There's these other things about practice and stuff like that. But I think it's nice clarification. There's also legal precedent which says it has to be a human. You can't have an AI as a co-inventor. And the other thing too is just ownership of the system does not give you rights to things that are invented from it. Which means like if you created the LLM, like the foundation model, or you have the service that people access to use it, you don't have any rights to the stuff that comes out of that from a patentable standpoint. Or if you're the business owner or something like that, you don't necessarily have the right to that as well. It might actually, the invention might actually go to the individual. So there's like a lot of layers here. I think it's fascinating, but it is more precise guidance than we've had to date.
Yeah, that part kind of reminded me of how the stories of how Thomas Edison tried to essentially control every patent involving the light bulb, not just the light bulb itself, but film cameras that used lights to make films and things like that. So there's some elements there of sort of a throwback to how patents used to work. But there's one individual in particular who has been trying to get AI as a co-inventor on patents in the US and the UK, with no luck, and now it seems that door is pretty firmly shut. But I think, the idea of what does an inventor look like is going to evolve, and it's going to include the idea of someone who's really good at communicating with a generative AI model will be someone who's a good inventor, because that helps them invent things.
Yeah, and there is this recognition that like it's interesting because it's a machine, and you might use a machine as part of your experimental process, but machines have never had ideas in the past. So now we have ideas, and so that's really the crux of this. And so there's this idea that AI assisted is good. You can use the machine to help you. You just have to have like a significant contribution. So I'm pretty fired up about it. I think it's like I'm fired up about it just intellectually, I should say. I don't know that it's going to make a huge difference, but one thing I think it will do is it won't preclude people from using AI models in order to invent. And I think that's super important. And actually the head of the USPTO, that's what they talked about. They're like, hey, the whole system is set up around this tension of creating a motivation for people to invent, and not creating an overly restrictive environment so they don't invent, or having having no environment of protection so they don't invent. So they're trying to strike a balance. It seems like there's a lot to be done there, but it seems like a really good outcome so far. Are we ready for winners and losers? Do we have another story?
No, I think we can go to winners and losers. I mean, it's a lot happened this week. Do you want to start with winners or losers this time?
Okay, so let's go with a winner. I'm going to go with Colossyan because like I've known them for a while, and I'm glad to see that they've gotten the traction, and they got the new investment round, which will help. And this is a very competitive market that they're in, but it shows that they're made a lot of progress, and they'll be able to grow that application space. How about you?
I'm going to say ChatGPT, but not for the reasons that we just talked about, although those are interesting. But we've talked about this sort of infusion of of AI into culture, and seeing it pop up that South Park episode written by ChatGPT. But it's just as someone who consumes pop culture, I've seen it pop up in multiple TV shows recently, and including a comic book where Batman referred to a generative AI chatbot that he had been working on as Bat GPT. So I feel like ChatGPT is going to forever be the default way we talk about these kinds of tools, regardless of who builds them or what they're used for. And I feel like that's a pretty solid win for them.
Absolutely. As much as like the real one of the losers this week, I think, is Apple with Vision Pro, but like that's not really generative AI. So we'll move to another thing. I actually think that everybody who's trying to create an independent like ChatGPT competitor, the world just got a little harder for them because Google being much more capable through Gemini, and integrating with the Google services is, I think, going to be like a significant tool. And so everybody wants an alternative in a market. And so ChatGPT, like you've got sort of the Copilot from Microsoft, which is like it's like a close twin, although slightly different. You've got the specialty things like we talk about Perplexity a lot, which we like. But then you've got Gemini, which is sort of this general purpose piece, and it ties nicely into Google. So I think it's just like it just raised the bar for a lot of people who are want to provide an independent solution. In order to break in, they're going to have to work harder and be more clever in order to do it.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree. I would say I would say they are definitely a loser. I think also it's just um, I also would want to go with that also because it's not just even the independence, but there's a lot of competition at the top. As you said, Apple's not even in the discussion, and Amazon's been doing plenty, but the narrative at least seems to be shaping into it's OpenAI / Microsoft versus Google, and then everyone else is sort of playing on the fringes, and that could change. But right now, it feels like if you want to be in that, if you have an idea for generative AI and you're not connected to either one of those, you're sort of you're gonna struggle a lot more than you would have otherwise. Would have even a few weeks ago, probably.
Absolutely. And we have a LinkedIn winner. A LinkedIn user said, "Hey, my winner and loser of the week is workplace productivity. Can't wait to send my custom GPT based on my Slack persona to a meeting whilst I read the transcript of its conversation with my coworkers' GPTs as it knocks out my less complex portion of the action items." Yes, this is the great. We're just going to send bots into the world to do things. It's going to be bot-to-bot interactions. We're going to kick back. We're going to think the big thoughts, maybe do some complex stuff, but maybe hopefully have a little more sanity in our lives.
Well, and also, I mean, imagine if you're the work slacker who wanted to pretend that you sent a message to your boss and say, "Oh, it's probably just lost in all those giant Slack threads," and suddenly those become a lot more accessible than they used to be.
That's right. Yeah, be ready for that. All right, folks, this is Gain, the Generative AI News Rundown. Come back next week. We'll talk about more of this stuff. That's Eric Schwartz. I'm Bret Kinsella. Give us a like on your way out. And hey, ping us on social media and LinkedIn, stuff like that. Let us know what you're thinking about, what you're talking about, what we should talk about on the show each week. Hope to see you next week. Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye-bye.